Hello, it's Elliot Colavito with the Collab, and today I'm here on September 5th, 2022, to chat with Sammy Holmes. I won't spoil who she is yet, but I'm in Toronto. Sammy is in Ottawa, and we're going to chat a bit about some of the work that she's done, oral history, all kinds of good stuff today. Again, don't want to spoil it, so I just want to open it up. Sammy, who are you? Tell us about yourself. What do you do?
Yeah, so I'm Sammy. Most recently, I just finished my master's of public history from Carleton University, where my research was kind of focusing on university archives and exploring the potential ways that we can think about accessibility in more broad and expanding ways in order to make records more accessible for communities, both inward and outside of the university, in order to critique historical narratives that the university purports about itself. So that was my research in my master's. More recently, I just took on a position as the education program coordinator for queer history at the Canadian Centre for Gender and Sexual Diversity. So that's very exciting, and I'm really enjoying that because it goes a lot with my research interest. Thank you of to LGBTQI plus history, queer archives, and also just thinking about digital and public history in that way. And more relaxed about me, I love to read, I love to hike, and I have a cat named Bigfoot. And very much my identity is my cat as well. So figured I needed to share it.
I can definitely relate to that. I have a cat named Punky Doodle, and she's my everything. She's somewhere doing something. All
Punky
right.
doodle.
So thank you for that awesome introduction. I think it gives the inevitable listeners a bit of a clue of where we might go with this today. So I'm
Yeah.
excited. Let's talk about the LGBT Purge Survivor Stories project that you did. For all the people out there, I came across Sammy on the internet, the way that the people tend to do these days, and found your website and saw this really awesome thing that you did with the LGBT Purge Survivor Story project. So why don't you tell us what the original project was like, and then we can kind of go into what you did with the materials.
Yeah. So I kind of outlined this a little bit on the website, but to begin, when I first well, I actually worked at the Canadian Centre for Gender and Sexual Diversity last summer as a public history student, and I was rethinking workshop materials and ways of providing students access to queer histories without necessarily relying strictly on a PowerPoint or like a regular workshop. And this is where I ran into the LGBT survivor stories, which were created in part by the LGBT Purge Fund in partnership with Sandbank Entertainment and No History. And I thought they were really interesting small snippets with survivors discussing their experiences and with the purge and how it affected their lives and the present too. And so I think I was really interested in using them during that work. But then as I went back into my public history degree, I was like, how could I work with this material a little bit more because it's so powerful and deep? And so I was thinking about ways in which that we could bring these oral history stories more outward in public ways. So I kind of accidentally fell into projection mapping and thinking about because I think part of it was that I was looking at Ottawa has a lot on Parliament. They've been doing a lot of projection opportunities with like projecting stories on there. They did one for the winter, and I went to school in Montreal, and I was all the time passing UQAM building. They were putting projections up there. And I was thinking that there's a really untapped potential when it comes to presenting history and historical learning opportunities through these projection tools and technologies. And so I kind of wanted to fiddle and explore what that would look like using the oral histories kind of as a way to think about how we can project queer history back onto the spaces in which it is implicit a part of. So that's kind of the project and exploration of bringing two types of historical technology and historical evidence, looking at oral histories and trying to bring them together.
Mm-hmm. So my brain's going in a few different directions, so bear
Yeah,
with
no
me.
worries.
But one of the really interesting things that I think that you did with this project, and it's an issue that we run into at the collab with our own materials, as well as we put together these really awesome 5-minute, 3-minute videos or whatever, and they sit online, and then only a handful of people really get to view them. I think most of the videos on the Purge YouTube channel have about 30-ish videos, and really that's not a lot of people. And so when we're talking about reaching publics with these things, it requires the publics to know the organization exists, that the history itself exists, and that there's something being done with those two things. And 99% of the time, we don't even have both of those pieces, right? So
Yeah.
I think that what you're doing with the projection onto buildings is really interesting because it's very confrontational, and kind
Yeah.
of forces people to be like, oh, there's this thing, right? Do you
Yeah.
want to talk a little bit more about why projection for you and why it was projection mapping itself that you chose to kind of work these materials with?
Yeah, for sure. So I think I was thinking about like how you were just talking about the fact that there's these amazing stories that I think have to go searching for a lot of the time. And that's the thing, is that's an amazing thing when people want to go searching for the stories and finding them. But how do we bring those out and share them with people who might not know these histories or have heard these stories before, or vice versa, creating spaces for queer communities outward of just being able to singularly search them online, and creating public spaces to commemorate, reflect, and also think and have conversations about it. And so I think I am really interested, and this kind of comes probably from the public history part of thinking about how we bring our histories outward. And I was trying to think that in more digital like capabilities. And I think projection mapping was that perfect spot in which to think about how we can like quite literally reflect histories of spaces that are often silenced because our built environments tend to have silent histories that need to be reflected through oral histories and shared in that way. And I was thinking about the ways in which we can literally reflect these histories back onto the spaces in which they're implicitly connected. And so that's why I chose just as like a potential, the Department of National Defense, because I mean, implicitly, a lot of those conversations that led to the LGBT purge happened in that building. So what does it look like to reflect these oral histories back onto those spaces, back onto those buildings, who might not necessarily be able to speak those histories just through their silent architecture, allowing those stories to speak right onto that building and bring that connection of that location more specifically in part with those stories and those experiences of survivors themselves. So that was what I was trying to do with thinking through projection, is the ways in which we can bring space to bear with oral histories and experiences, and bring them together.
Yeah, and I think that's, really important, really powerful. And I think a lot of other oral history projects out there in the world do some of that work without
Yeah,
maybe all the time being as thoughtful about space and the way that you're being with this project. And that's certainly not true of all of them. A lot of people are very thoughtful about how they're using
yeah.
space. I am curious, do you have more thoughts about the kind of marriage between oral history and space? This is a bit of an interesting one, right? Oftentimes you record an interview sometimes in a home, in a cafe, or in the post-COVID world on Zoom, like we are.
Yeah,
And then, you take up this little digital package and you put it into an archive, or if you're, one of the lucky ones, you put it onto a website or something. But
yeah,
I'm interested in thinking alongside you more about space, physical space and oral history.
yeah. So I think what intrigued me to the idea of trying to pair projection mapping with oral history is that sense of that like dichotomy between space and oral history, right? Like I think oral history has that like impertemporality, like it where physical space has that little bit more of a physical quality, but also it tends to be a thing that we subconsciously experience in our everyday lives, that we pass every day without thinking about the fact that there's millions of lives and experiences and voices that have an impact to that space that we're traversing, right? And oral histories kind of have that quality in which they transform over time, and they're not in physical way. They're physical in the fact that they're shared through human experiences with other people, but they're also not, they kind of are different than that of like what we would call maybe more quote unquote like what Western notions of like historical evidence would look like in that physical sense of preserving it. Oral histories transform, they change every time they're told, but they kind of stray away from that physical sense of what it means to like preserve a story. So I think bringing them together provides good opportunity to think about how stories of space are maybe more quiet, but then oral histories can speak to that quietness, and reveal them in different ways that sometimes spaces tend to silence. And I was thinking about that living in Ottawa, in a capital in which we're around historical buildings that have a lot of stories within them that we are very aren't always spoken about, or are kind of silenced in the fact that it is the capital. And so thinking about the ways in which there's certain stories that are told about these spaces, but others that aren't. And oral history provides that opportunity to kind of, I think in different ways about space and hear different stories that aren't usually the ones that are commemorated, especially when we're thinking like more nationally. But yeah, I think there's a really interesting interplay between space and oral history that I think a lot of people have dived into, and I think have infinite potential for more exploration too. And I think projection mapping also provides the opportunity to think in different ways, because it's physical in the sense that you're putting it on a physical building, but also projection mapping, that's also not always there. It has a sense for it will be there for a second and then it's gone. So I think
Right.
it kind of is that perfect middle where it plays a little bit with the two. And that's why I thought it was very interesting and to explore.
Yeah, I thought so too. I was like, wow, this is something. This person's onto something, you know. I do want to shift a little bit because this is something else that I was interested in from the project, site that you made. You talk a bit about guerrilla narrative methodology. First, I
Yeah.
want you to explain that so that people don't have to kind of go out in the world and do too much work on their own to kind of figure out what that is if they're unfamiliar. So first,
Yeah.
what is guerrilla narrative methodology, and then how does your project fit into this methodology?
Yeah, well, and I first off want to say I think guerrilla methodology and like more historically, that's something that is always shifting and ongoing. It's something that I don't think I even fully know, and I think that's a good thing to lean into. It's something that's always changing and moving. And that's my professor that I was in the course for, that I did this work in a digital humanities course, Dr. Sham Graham. He kind of describes it as a like using digital technologies to surface hidden stories and insert them into spaces where they didn't quote unquote belong, and thinking about like what it looks like to counter program. So I think it's kind of a little, it's in resistance to the specific or quote unquote narratives that are provided to us or taught that these are the normal or the narratives of the way we understand the world around us, and and recovering stories that exist that have been pushed to the side and bringing them outward. And I think that also requires thinking in more public ways about the ways in which we do that, right? I think a lot of academic work is doing a lot of that recovery or uplifting of stories and voices that are maybe counter to what like we are told as the narrative. But I think it's thinking about the ways we can extend that outward, pushing outside of our silos, and bringing those histories to publics, right? And so I think that is part of what I see as guerrilla digital narrative is an active resistance to the ways in which histories are taught, histories are preserved, and histories are commemorated, and thinking about the ways we can push that in ways that are more community-centered, more collaborative, more creating spaces for people and communities to hold and share these histories while uplifting them in a way in which to push against and resist normative narratives that are exclusive and very narrow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, in kind of thinking about, what you're saying about it's great to do all this recovery work, but it's how we get it out there. And one of the other things that you put out there very openly on this project was kind of your behind the scenes process. And I thought that was really interesting. Do you mind talking a little bit about why you chose to put your process out and what you hope publics might learn from academics being more forthcoming about the way that they go about their work?
Yeah, I think that academics don't explore enough, personally. I think that a lot of the time there's a lot of rigid understandings of the disciplines that we're in and the ways in which we conduct research that can feel very structured and a little bit where there isn't that room to creatively think and expand. I think that's the thing I love about public history and digital history is they're very involved in thinking about ways in which we expand and become a little bit more interdisciplinary and think about the ways we cross those boundaries between public and academic. And so I think what I wanted to do, and I think a part of that is also being very clear about the ways in which you're exploring and being clear about where you are and where you're situated and where your specific subjectivity led you to certain ways in your research and your project formation, and also the ways in which your project maybe failed or maybe didn't reach what you wanted it to be, in order to kind of explain that this is a starting point and never an end. Like research never has a beginning or end. It's never the right answer. There's always more ways to explore and look different ways. So I think what I wanted to present through my research is that this is one potential of a way in which we can think about how we bring to us LGBTQ plus I histories outward, but also that there is a lot of ways in which this project could grow and be better, right? I think because it was created in the context of a small semester course, I didn't I wasn't able to connect with survivors on my own and leave these oral histories. And so that led me to having to think about the way I formed this project differently. I had the ability to be able to like watch these videos and feel very impacted, but it wasn't my right to be able to project those within my project, even though it was an example and a potential. So that's why I kind of used the methodology of, let me look for it, listening out loud and being able to, so basically it's a methodology, I think, established by Della Pollock, which basically you watch a video, you listen to oral history, and then you try to like remember how it felt and you experienced it, and then you translate that outward and by your own best memory and way that you experienced it as a listener. So that was the way that I felt that I could present what the gist of these, or the feelings that I felt as a viewer of these oral histories, and project that to show that there is a potential for how passionate and powerful these stories could be if we had the time and also the resources to be able to do this work. And so I think, and it's a real life situation too, where I know this was in the context of a semester, but also if we were thinking about extending this project more broadly, it would take a lot of money and it would take a lot of research opportunities that I don't know if exist or not. There's a lot of limitations on this. So I wanted to present it as a potential and also demonstrate what this like would look like if we were thinking about it on a larger scale too. So,
Yeah.
but yeah.
And so we can end with this question, and you're very good on the cusp here, so I might throw you a curveball.
Okay.
But one of the things that I'm thinking about is, yes, this was kind of like your potential proposal for what you might do with these materials. You didn't necessarily actually get to do it, and all of that good stuff. So if maybe let's imagine you can't bring this one to life. It's just the mock-up, but somebody like me at the collab gets really interested in your work and is like, you know what, I want to hire Sammy to do something for us with one of our projects, let's say, not anything specific, but I like this fantasy land we're living in. What aspects of the work that you did on your Purge proposal project do you wish that you could carry forward to new projects? Do you wish other academics were carrying forward to their projects? Just pick one or two things that really you think would be really impactful and that real game changers, you know?
Great question. I think one thing that I wish I would have been able to do is, well, two things that I think I'm going to take it a little different, where I think there's things I wish I could have done with the project that I couldn't into the context, that I think would be important things that would, if this project was going to be carried out in a real way, would be the crux of like what I think would be the best parts of them. And I think particularly collecting those oral histories and thinking about the ways in which when you're communicating with someone with an oral history, being very clear about the idea of what projecting that would look like. So then it becomes a collaborative project in that way, in which someone is thinking about how it would be, how their stories are presented in the projection, and also thinking about the ways it could be created collaboratively, like maybe thinking about the ways in which working with survivors and working with their oral histories could also be translated collaboratively into what it would look like for that to be projected. It doesn't necessarily have to be the way that I put a video up there. It could be thinking about like a really amazing animated graphic that displays these stories where you hear their voices speaking about their experiences. So I think there's an element of collaborative work that I didn't get a chance to execute with this work that I think could be absolutely amazing, and thinking about the ways in which we share 2S LGBTQ plus stories through digital means. And I think projection mapping also creates an opportunity for community spaces to create historical work. And again, that was something I didn't get the chance to do because I projected this on the wall of my basement. And so I think that if we were thinking about this actually executed, there's amazing opportunity for actual spaces more physically that these are projected, but also thinking about how that looks like with bringing community in and maybe having opportunities for historical communication and dialogue within the spaces these are projected. I think those are two things that I would love to see if this project was, or something of the sort was ever executed with this, is thinking about oral histories collaboration and thinking about the projection as also a way to create space with community on top of also like engaging with that on a physical space too.
Yeah, I like your spin on the question more than the one I asked, honestly.
No, I was trying to think of what I would have wanted to see like this project, and those are the things. So
yeah, you know, it's even just looking through your kind of proposal website thing, it's given me a lot of interesting things to think about in terms of my work at the collab. We have you know, had an issue other beyond social media, trying to kind of reach publics and how do we get this information to the best way. My co-oral history interviewer, Alicia Stranges, and I recorded field notes for every interview that we sat in, but we've done nothing with these field notes. They're just sitting there. All of our kind of, right off the back of an interview thoughts are just sitting in our OneDrive, and we could do something with them, but I'm not even sure we've ever really thought about what we might do other than revisit them when we might write an article or something, which is boring and not for the public ultimately, right? So you've given me a lot to think about. I'm sure you're going to give everyone else who's going to listen to this a lot to think about. And thank you. Thank you for coming and sitting with me and taking some time out of your Labor Day to do something here. I'm sorry about that.
No, it's okay. Thank you for having me. This was a great opportunity to discuss this work, and very exciting.
Awesome. Do you have anything that you want to say before I hit the end record?
Nope, I think we're good.
Okay, thank you very much.